He walked into the courtroom wearing a suit 2 sizes too big, nervous, quiet, just a black teenager facing a world that had already judged him. The moment he opened his mouth, the judge's smirk said it all. "This kid doesn't belong here." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Laughter slipped between the benches, and every eye told him to sit down and stay silent. But what they didn't see was the brilliance hiding behind those shaking hands, the calm before a storm no one expected. Because before this day was over, the same judge who mocked him would be standing in stunned silence, questioning everything he thought he knew about justice. Before that courtroom moment, Jamal lived a quiet, disciplined life that rarely drew attention. At just 19, he was the kind of student who stayed late in the library, driven by something deeper than ambition: justice. Growing up in a neighborhood where police sirens sang louder than lullabies, Jamal had seen what injustice looked like long before he ever studied it. His mother, a nurse who worked double shifts, taught him strength through silence. His late father, once wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit, taught him why truth mattered more than pride. When Jamal earned early acceptance into law school, it wasn't just a personal victory, it was a promise to his father's memory. But that promise would soon be tested in a way he never imagined. A routine visit to observe a court case turned into something far different. He walked in hoping to learn from real attorneys, but the moment the judge's gaze met his, the atmosphere shifted. Whispers started. Eyes lingered. That subtle, heavy silence of judgment filled the air. Jamal didn't know it yet, but he was about to become the lesson, one that would expose how deep prejudice can run, even in a place built to uphold justice. The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of routine, lawyers shuffling papers, clerks checking schedules, spectators whispering. Jamal took a seat in the back row, notebook in hand, ready to study how justice unfolded in real time. But the moment he stood to observe a procedural hearing, something any law student might do, the atmosphere shifted. The judge's eyes found him immediately narrowing with irritation. "Sit down," the judge barked, his tone sharp, dismissive. Jamal froze, unsure what he'd done wrong. He wasn't disrupting anyone, wasn't even speaking. But the stares that followed told him this wasn't about rules. It was about him, his skin, his presence in a place some people still believed he didn't belong. A few people in the gallery snickered quietly. The bailiff crossed his arms, glaring. Jamal's chest tightened. Every instinct told him to disappear, to sink into the wooden bench and let the moment pass. But something inside him refused. He politely explained that he was a law student, there to learn, not to interfere. That should have been enough. Instead, the judge leaned back, smirked, and said, "A law student, huh? You sure about that?" Laughter echoed softly through the room. Jamal's face burned. Every word that followed cut deeper. The judge questioned his education, his motives, even his right to be in that courtroom. Jamal's calm responses only seemed to fuel the mockery. Each time he tried to explain himself, the judge interrupted, turning the moment into a spectacle for the onlookers. And then came the breaking point. The judge demanded proof, his ID, his school papers, even his advisor's name, as if Jamal were some imposter pretending to belong. "You people always have excuses," the judge muttered under his breath, barely audible but enough for the room to hear. The words hit Jamal like a slap. "You people." The phrase hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The courtroom grew silent, the kind of silence that screamed louder than any insult. Jamal's heart pounded, his thoughts racing, not with anger but clarity. He realized then that this wasn't just bias. It was an open display of the very injustice he had studied to fight against. But rather than walk out, Jamal did something unexpected. Calmly, he reached into his bag and pulled out a neatly folded document, a letter from the university dean, verifying his credentials and his standing as a legal trainee, assigned to observe courtroom proceedings. He approached the clerk, handed it over, and waited. The clerk read it, eyes widening slightly before glancing nervously at the judge. For a brief second, Jamal thought the truth would settle everything, but the judge only smirked again, waving it off. "Anyone can print a letter," he said coldly. The room murmured. Jamal felt the sting of humiliation, but also something else, a rising fire that no amount of prejudice could extinguish. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. Instead, he stood straighter, his eyes meeting the judge's without fear. Because what the judge didn't know, what no one in that room realized yet, was that Jamal wasn't just a student observer that day. He was about to stand in as a substitute counsel on a pending case, one that would force this same judge to see him in a very different light. And when that moment came, the entire courtroom would witness what real justice looked like. The courtroom felt colder that morning, the tension sharp enough to cut the air. Jamal stood at the counsel's table, this time not as an observer, but as a certified trainee stepping in for a public defender who had fallen ill. The same judge who had mocked him just days earlier now stared in disbelief. The smirk was gone, replaced by something harder to define: discomfort. Whispers rippled through the courtroom as Jamal introduced himself formally. His voice was calm, steady, but beneath that composure burned the memory of humiliation. Every word he spoke now carried the weight of every young black man told he didn't belong. The case wasn't complicated, a working-class man facing an unfair charge, a case others had written off as unwinnable. But Jamal saw what others didn't: gaps, inconsistencies, and a clear abuse of authority. He dissected the prosecution prosecution's argument piece by piece, methodically, relentlessly, the room grew silent. Even the judge, once so eager to belittle him, leaned forward, realizing this young man wasn't there by accident. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Jamal presented a motion citing legal precedents the court had overlooked, cases the judge himself had ruled on. For a split second, their eyes locked, and the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The confidence in Jamal's tone was unshakable, his command of the law undeniable. The prosecutor stumbled, the judge hesitated, and in that hesitation, the power dynamic flipped completely. Jamal had not only defended the innocent man, he had exposed the bias, the arrogance, and the injustice that had tainted the courtroom from the start. But instead of anger, Jamal spoke with grace. He didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice. He simply let the truth do what truth does best, shine. By the time he finished, the same people who once laughed now sat frozen, speechless. The judge adjusted his glasses, his hands trembling slightly as he muttered, "Motion granted." In that single moment, the mockery turned to respect, and the courtroom that once tried to break him was forced to stand witness to his brilliance. But for Jamal, this wasn't victory. It was something far greater, proof that justice, when faced with truth, cannot stay blind forever. When the gavel struck that final time, the sound echoed deeper than anyone expected. Justice had been served, but not because of a title or power or privilege. It happened because one young black man refused to bow to the weight of prejudice. Jamal didn't celebrate. He simply gathered his papers, nodded respectfully, and walked out of that courtroom with his head held high. But everyone inside knew something had changed. The same judge who mocked him now looked down, unable to meet his eyes. The spectators who once laughed were silent, realizing they had witnessed more than a legal victory. They had witnessed a mirror held up to their own bias. Outside, as Jamal stepped into the sunlight, the moment hit him fully. This wasn't just about proving his worth. It was about reclaiming the narrative for every young black person told they didn't belong in certain spaces. He thought of his father, of all those who never got the chance to defend themselves, and he whispered a quiet promise to keep fighting, not with anger, but with knowledge and truth. Word of that courtroom scene spread. Some called it inspiring, others uncomfortable, but that's what truth does. It shakes comfort, it demands reflection. Jamal's story became a symbol, a reminder that racism doesn't always wear a uniform or shout in anger. Sometimes it hides behind a robe and a smile, and yet, in that moment, courage broke through. Because when one person stands up to prejudice, it doesn't just change a courtroom, it challenges a system. So ask yourself, how many more Jamals will it take before justice truly sees color only in the ink of the law and not the skin of the accused?